Tonight, we are so pleased to bring Michael D. Gurven, as Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Go Gauchos, as well as a former New Mexico Lobo and a Penn State Nittany Lion. I'm not sure if he has any identity issues, but there you have it for Michael. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and his work has been featured in the New York Times and on NPR and the BBC. 7 decades, rumor has it, did not take him 7 decades to write this book. However, it is his life work, and we're so excited to have you, Michael. Thank you for coming. So please welcome Michael.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's quite nice to see people from various walks of life intersecting here. Standing room only. Wow, impressive. There is one seat here if someone. It's not like the last piece of cake, so someone can actually take the seat. Well, again, yeah, thank you so much for coming, spending an evening here as well, and thank you, Michael, for organizing not just this, but all these book events. I mean, the calendar is quite full. It's quite nice to actually keep these types of activities here in independent bookstore. My wife is a frequent customer as a librarian at Elwood Elementary, and so we love coming here. So thank you. It is actually the main reason I wrote a book, was just so I could come up here and one of these things.
Actually, before you start, Michael, Lisa is the only reason why you're here.
Yeah, well.
Just kidding.
No, it's you're not the first person to say something similar to that. I guess I would just kind of open up with maybe a question that you might have. I'm just going to assume that none of you have read the book. I know my colleagues, probably the first thing you did was just look at the acknowledgments and see if your name is in there. It's okay. We all do it. But like, there's a lot of books out there on aging and longevity and health, how to live healthy lives and all that. Like, do we really need another book on the topic? If the answer were yes, or if the answer were no, then I wouldn't have written one. But I do think we did need a different book, and a lot of the message we get about aging is how to defeat it, right? How to kind of conquer aging, treating aging like a disease, which is kind of a weird concept because if it's a disease, we all get it, if we're lucky. And so, that kind of framing is one particular angle, but it's kind of negative and kind of pessimistic. That combined with this idea that the global population is aging, we're all getting older and we're having fewer kids, and so changes the demographics. This is a big problem. Blah blah blah. You've heard this many times before, and so it's another kind of gloom and doom kind of message. And what I wanted to do was something a little bit different. And something that wasn't just, the future of getting, destroying, reversing aging is right around the corner and getting heavy deep into the molecular biology of things. There's plenty of books like that out there. And so my goal was actually to kind of reframe, do a rethink, and based on some of my perspectives, which as an evolutionary oriented anthropologist, I like to think kind of big picture globally, but also kind of deeply back in time. And I've spent a good chunk of my career kind of working with populations who have some of the lifeways that are most similar to maybe how we would have lived prior to industrialization. These are hunter-gatherers and small-scale farmers. And maybe the first glimpse and the first hint of like a book actually came in one of my first field seasons. This was when I was actually still a grad student, working with a group called the Ache. And the Ache were hunter-gatherers. Anyone here drink guayaki, yerba mate? No? You? Okay. Well, guayaki is an old name for the Ache, actually. And the Ache actually participate now in harvesting some of the yerba mate. But the Ache were hunter-gatherers almost full-time until the 1970s when they were contacted. So one of the last remaining groups And by the time I went there in the late 90s, they were still spending a good amount of time in the forest. They were still going back into the forest and doing, pure hunting and gathering for anywhere from a day or two to weeks on end. And I went, and this is me, city stock. I don't know what I can say about my immune system at the time, but I never before had gotten so sick. I got both giardia and dysentery at the same time. And to this day, I don't even remember how because in the Yache, moved camp like every day or every other day. And I don't even know how I could barely even stand, much less walk. So I can't even remember how I got from one place to another. Somehow managed to do it. Never felt so bad. But I got through it and I survived. And that was like a first glimpse. I got through it because people were literally like holding me and carrying me, helping me walk from one camp to another. And this idea that a hunter-gatherer band is so social and so cooperative that that's a big part of how we are able to survive throughout childhood and adulthood and make it to even think about something like aging. And I probably wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the Yache. And this wasn't just me because I was a complete novice. I mean, this is what the Yache do for each other.
And where is that?
So this is in Paraguay.
In Paraguay.
So yeah, close to the border of Brazil. And this is the Yache, they do this for each other. And that was actually kind of a glimpse into part of the story of how we got to be a long-lived species. Essentially, rest is a story about cooperation and about our social behavior. And that was a story that wasn't being told. And I wanted to not just say, well, that's just a historical lesson about the past, but we've done it before and we can do it again. And so the sort of rethink about aging was harnessing kind of all of the activities and ways that our elders kind of contributed throughout our evolutionary history. And part of the story is that long life is not just this sort of extra benefit that we get that just kind of came out of nowhere, but it's sort of a fundamental aspect of who we are, related to all the things we take for granted sometimes about our species. And middle-aged, older adults are part of the reason that we had long life evolving in the first place, and it's part of the reason underlying our evolutionary success and why we were able to spread around the globe. And when we get wiped out, we tend to colonize fairly quickly again. And so if we did it before, that the issue now about global aging, it's really a difference of degree, not a difference in kind. Yeah, there's more older people, but we need to rethink. And so that's what I think, or I'm trying to accomplish with this book. It's also related to, these days when anyone wants to justify their kind of wayward behavior, they think, well, hunter-gatherers used to do blah, blah. Amber does it all the time. And, it's always in the popular imagination. And hunter-gatherers are one of these, like, litmus tests almost. No one really knows that much about them, but you see what you want to see, right? So, humans in the state of nature, we're either, like, inherently good, we're inherently bad. You can read what you want into hunter-gatherers, but no one actually has told the story about what it's actually like living with hunter-gatherers. And so there's a lot of elements of that sort of intersect with telling the story of aging, from, Krista's probably wondering whether she should, get a fecal transplant, this weekend. Like these ideas about like the gut microbiome. Somehow we've lost that diversity that we had once we were hunter-gatherers, and what should I do in order to replenish that diversity? And so there's a lot of these kinds of issues that I feel like hadn't really been told as part of this broader story about aging and how to age well. So yeah, that was basically everything, the mindset behind doing this. And the basis of like 7 decades actually it wasn't like I sat, in a bar late at night and on the back of a napkin calculated, voila, 7 decades. It was actually an empirical observation that groups like the Yache and other hunter-gatherers, when we look at the ages of when people tend to die, so the lifespan in adulthood, there was kind of like a nice distribution with a sort of peak around 7 decades. And I actually published, Michael, you asked me how long it took me to write this book. I published a paper kind of with that empirical observation back in 2006, embarrassingly. And so that idea just kind of been percolating. And the implications, well, what does that actually mean if the body is sort of under non-industrial conditions? And it turns out when we look in the historical record, as best as we can tell, there's evidence that exists, prior to, written records. And so, what does that actually mean? And so really kind of fleshing that idea out, maybe that took 10, 15 years to do in this book. So, I guess what I wanted to do, I was told to read a couple excerpts, and I have one brief excerpt from the intro that just kind of gives a gist about what the book is kind of setting out to do. I don't want to give any of the gems away because, you're supposed to buy the book. My wife, that's her lesson. Don't ever give the answers away. You always tell the punchline, and then no one's going to buy your book. So I thought I would do that for just like a half page, and like start doing jumping jacks if I'm talking too long. All right. The key to understanding aging and lifespan for any species is to grasp its natural history, the enduring exposures and selection pressures that shaped the way species evolved. For humans, this means appreciating aging in the context of a lifestyle of hunting and gathering. As a species, we were full-time hunter-gatherers for most of our evolutionary history, which many still practiced until 500 years ago. And for millennia, we also included domesticated plants and animals as part of our ever-changing livelihoods as farmers and pastoralists. This historical fact may seem uncontroversial, even obvious, but the biomedical and pharmaceutical industry, hell-bent on extending lifespan by slowing, halting, or even reversing aging, operates as if natural history matters little. Moreover, some researchers who focus on aging believe that study of our past and of high mortality populations in the present only obscures understanding of how aging operates. The leading belief that dominates our industry of longevity is that human aging can be studied and understood only in places like the US, Japan, and Sweden, living under the best of conditions. Such a view is myopic and cannot provide much insight into the flexibility of human physiology. Let's skip. The health-conscious public is usually captivated by considering potential lessons to be learned by stripping away the many layers of our contemporary, uber-civilized, ultra-processed, and protected existence. This sadly often reduces to platitudes about the simple joys of outdoor living among romanticized noble savages, or wild appreciation for the modern comforts that distance us from a less romantic view of what past life must have been like. Balancing the rich ethnographic record with my own good fortune to have lived with several small-scale subsistence groups, I hope to walk that fine line between selective grazing of ancient lives and overgeneralizing from too few examples. By stepping outside what's most familiar to us, we can gain fresh insight about our golden years. That insight can help us rethink how to gain purpose and meaning from our elderhood, and how to spend those years a little healthier and less lonely. That's good enough for now. What I wanted to do next, the funny thing, one of the things I enjoyed most, was I just had all these little subheadings throughout the book, which for me were placeholders, and I actually never thought the editors would keep them. And so some of them were wildly inappropriate, but they somehow made it through. And so, as far as reading another excerpt, I was gonna just read some subheadings and let you choose what you'd like to hear. Who are you calling old? But really, just tell us who ages fastest. This one, from gonorrhea to grandparents. I can't believe they got that one through. What if Tithonus asked for just 2 extra decades? Parliament of organs, one hoss shays, and other mixed metaphors. Ice mummy dearest.
Oh,
Uh,
good one.
You are what you don't eat. It's not as bad as you fear. Get Mrs. Palfrey out of the Claremont, and be proud of having a tiny cack. So, what would you all like to hear?
Well, I'd like to hear more about community,
Okay, community.
because that's
Yeah.
really important. You know,
Yeah.
there's so many people that are lonely.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I think that's get Mrs. Palfrey out of the Claremont.
I wanted to hear.
Oh, all right, all right. So I will read a little bit about from that part, just to tease. A half-century ago, Margaret Mead complained about the need to develop a new style of aging in our society. The U.S. ideals of autonomy and independence may be a source of pride, but are also a source of misery. As she noted, quote, perhaps on the verge of starvation, in time without friends, but we are independent. She blamed the isolation and irrelevance of elders on older people themselves, thinking that elders chose to withdraw from society. Whether they are living alone or comfortable in assisted living with other elders, the segregation of elders deprives younger generations of role models for how to age and grow older, and of a direct connection with history. As Mead wrote, quote, they, young people, need to know about their past before they can understand the present and plot the future. In the 2005 film, which probably no one here has seen, called Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. Anyone seen it? Heard of it? Wow, look at that. All right, usually there's one. Well, a stoic elderly widow aims for independence, checking herself into a retirement hotel in London. Materially comfortable, she and the hotel's residents are bored, isolated, and lonely. Spurned by her ingrate grandson, Mrs. Palfrey finds her life turned around when she meets a frustrated young writer and musician, and they become fast friends and kindred spirits. The young writer Ludo becomes her surrogate grandson, and everyone thinks he's her real grandson. Mrs. Palfrey dies after a series of illnesses following a tragic fall, but after her death, Ludo is finally able to write his novel. Outside the confines of the Claremont, fictive kin provide real connection. Both Mrs. Palfrey and Ludo prospered from finding each other. Yeah. So much more. I mean, it goes through, throughout evolutionary history, most people did have children, and those children have children, and so people are grandparents. And I kind of talk about in modern society, we're having fewer children, right? And those children are having fewer children. And so many more of us will not be grandparents, but we still have this kind of need to connect across generations, right? We don't have to be biologically related to younger people in order to feel like you want to contribute. So I kind of go through all these different things, and there's a little bit of a somewhat takedown of Simone de Beauvoir, which, is everyone maybe a great philosopher, but she was so negative about aging. Really had kind of awful views. And I just kind of put a little jibe, de Beauvoir never had any grandchildren. And maybe that kind of contributed a little bit to her negative view about grandparenthood. So yeah, I didn't want to kind of drag on too much about that. Maybe, I don't know, is there time for maybe one more kind of excerpt before we get to Q&A? Was there another little tidbit that rang out to anybody?
Mike, you gotta do the gonorrhea one.
You gotta read the grandparents?
Come on.
All right. Let's go there. It's probably like the most boring part, right? That was just a teaser.
That's why you made
hopefully
the
not. I don't
subtitle
know.
so interesting to keep
I
people
forgot.
reading. Okay.
There was Death Disco with Cancer, with another one that somehow made it through. All right, from gonorrhea to grandparents. Once an individual reaches mid to late adulthood, evolutionary engineering logic, See, this is already sounding boring, right? Would posit that further maintaining fast, effortful cognitive processing may not be worth it. The expected gains to our productivity or fitness are outweighed by the cost of keeping all that machinery in tip-top shape. And while fitness gains at older ages is snubbed by natural selection relative to earlier gains, remember from earlier chapters, well, post-reproductive life does not equal zero fitness. It doesn't apply for us lucky humans, at least. So I kind of go through a little bit of that. From a gene's eye view, protective alleles that help maintain cognitive function up through late ages are unique to the human lineage and are believed to have spread rapidly in our species. Rapid spread like that usually occurs only under positive selection. That is, when there's a big benefit that outweighs any cost. One of these genes codes for a different form of the CD33 receptor expressed in immune cells, including those in the brain, called microglia. Microglia are the immune scavengers that survey and protect the brain from harmful infections and trauma. And then I say, a mutant form of this allele is unique to humans. It's not present in the great apes or among even our hominin cousins like Neanderthals and Denisovans. The human form is especially good at protecting against inflammation in the brain. So kind of explaining why this might lower our risks of Alzheimer's disease. But here's kind of the cool part. The advantage leading to spread of this gene, though, probably had little to do with preventing Alzheimer's disease amongst prehistoric 80-year-olds. The best guess is that it fostered protection against the fertility crumbling effect of gonorrhea. As if scrotal pain and cruel discharges weren't bad enough, untreated gonorrhea, come on, you gotta laugh, right? Can lead to infertility in both women and men. Gonorrhea bacteria dress up in a false disguise to evade our immune system, but the human CD33 gene recognizes the trick and positions the immune system to attack. So that's the gist of from
That was my
gonorrhea
chapter. I'm not kidding. That's
to grandparents, right? All right, that's probably long enough, right? To maybe open it up to some Q&A. Oh, I see other new faces have come in. There's a seat right here. I know everyone's scared. Oh, hey. Any questions? Greg.
Yeah, one of the best things about research is that you don't know the answer until you're done with the research. And so I'm wondering, and this book came out of a lifetime of research for you, and I'm wondering what surprises you encountered in the course of this research. I mean, why did you discover after decades of researching this that you would not have guessed, that may have been opposite or remarkably different than, say, traditional assumptions about this topic that really...
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of them, actually. One of them, for example, many of you probably heard about inflammation, right? Thing we don't like, it's not good. It's sort of associated with all the bad chronic diseases of aging. And in earlier work, we actually showed that one of the groups I've been working with for the longest in Bolivia have fairly high levels of inflammation. And so one idea was that, okay, well, if you have high inflammation, everything we know about it should lead to greater risk of certain chronic diseases. And yet we kind of knew that people were fairly physically active and healthy, didn't hear about people, having heart attacks and whatnot. But sometimes it's hard to know, right? Because it could just be that if you get heart disease, you don't live very long in that kind of setting. And so if you're a medical team that shows up quickly, doesn't spend very long, you just don't see many people with heart disease. So the first kind of wow surprise was not just looking at blood pressure, but actually looking in the coronary arteries themselves through a whole set of circumstances that allowed us through CT imaging to see that there really wasn't the calcification that unfortunately many of us have, and even like mummies in Egypt had. And so even our cardiologists had said that heart disease has just been with us forever. And so we were able to say, well, maybe it's been with us forever, but they probably wasn't relevant to our health forever. So you may have some heart disease, but you weren't dying of it. So that was a bit of a surprise, right? That you have high inflammation, but you didn't see heart disease. And what we also don't see is something that's been kind of called inflammaging. This idea that inflammation just increases with age, and which again makes things worse, in our later years. But the belief is also that it's not just, if you're smoking a lot and you have and there's obesity and other diabetes and other problems that increases your inflammation and aspects of our diet, but even just your cells, when they become senescent, they don't just kind of hang out there dormant, but they actually kind of emit inflammatory this and that. And so this was kind of an idea that inflammaging is a human universal. And this part actually isn't even really in the book, because it was newer than that. But it was a surprise that we aren't seeing this increase in inflammation. And we were only able to see this kind of more recently because, the gold standard in anything aging related is actually studying the same people over time. And that's hard, right? Most of us kind of, if you just take a snapshot of people at one slice in time and you all differ in ages, I kind of compare people of different ages, but that's not as good as studying the same people over time. And so doing it that way, we actually saw that inflammation was not increasing with age. And I can't tell you the exact answer of what implication that means, but it at this point it shows that what we thought was a universal is not. There's still more to learn. And if inflammaging is really important for our worsening health in late ages, it shows it's actually a hopeful message that there's things that are modifiable, even at a population level, right? Because it's like almost the entire population is not experiencing inflammaging, is not experiencing heart disease. It's not just the healthiest amongst us, which our society, we have healthy people that no matter what, they don't get sick, and it seems like they don't age. So yeah, I think that's a kind of a hopeful message. It actually shows there's a lot to learn. And what I kind of think is cool, at least this is tooting our horn coming from the social sciences, is this isn't coming out of biomedicine, this is coming out of anthropology, right? And so, yay for social sciences actually shining the light on a different area that, suggests maybe we have a lot more to learn still. Ooh. Cool. I'm actually surprised. So Nicole is usually the first one to ask a question in any event. You were probably in your car driving over and you had your hand
I
up.
was in some traffic. I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have hopes to write a second book? Well, I know that I'm sure your publisher has asked you this and all that, but knowing what you want to do next. Knowing the kind of research that you want to be doing next, can you envision this is another part of the story that I haven't finished yet, and this is what I would, would you do it in the same theme of this is how our life course turns out, and this is another aspect of it that I didn't get to highlight yet.
Yeah. So the question. Sure.
Thank you.
So the question was, what's your second book going to be about? Is there something you didn't have a chance to address or you learned I'm still reeling from the first one. I think so. I guess one thing that was nice about writing this book, it's not just here's all my papers that no one's ever going to read, and a public facing version of that. The academic publishing world is just more and more confining, right? Papers are shorter and shorter, which alone isn't that bad because attention spans are short, but it's hard to tell a decent story. And so I just really enjoyed writing this book because I was able to tell the story I've been kind of slowly wanting to tell, and to do that. Well, you can tell me if it was effective or not. And sort of towards the end, it's the last chapter. Actually, I sent it to some colleagues, and they're like, "Get rid of those last chapters." But in my mind, I was like, "That was my favorite because it was the most speculative." was actually getting into aspects of mental health and sort of the subjectivity of people's lives. Like, it's one thing to know whether you have heart disease or not, but are people happy? You know, what is life like for a Chimane or a Hadza if you're 73 years old? If you have dementia, what is it like for someone, you know, with dementia? And that story is something I've been spending a lot more time focusing on, and it's sort of less biomedical, but more gets me back to like the origins of anthropology, just talking to people, hearing stories, hearing about people's lives, and hearing, you know, their version of things. And so I've been building that, and I don't think there's any paper that would be appropriate for that. So that's kind of where I'm thinking in terms of, I know you're interested in those things too, so maybe you like this answer, but the second book would, I think, be even more like in the words of people and a little bit less, not to say this is pedantic, but this is not all just about like my adventures, right? So, and yeah, so maybe a little bit more of that is where I'd be heading. Sorry, Katie had her, and then, yeah.
So I have a question for you, maybe somewhat in line with Nick's question, but could you talk a little bit about whether or not Chimane lifestyles are changing? And if so, what you think the impact of that is or is going to be on how people age?
Yeah, great question. And I actually have a whole section on it in the book, because usually, you know, and this is understandable, feels like Dianetics, you know, pages. You know, understandably, especially from an American audience, you know, what are we learning? What can we learn for us from, you know, adventures in other places? And, you know, what are the lessons for Americans? And, you know, NIH, right, is funding this work, so there should be lessons for us. But, you know, the reality also is, you know, what are lessons for people themselves throughout the global South, and especially because, you know, in some ways, a lot of the book is written sort of in that, you know, murky ethnographic present, right? Whereas the reality of people's lives is that, you know, there are no pristine hunter-gatherers out there, right? And the way like the imagination runs wild. Every group everywhere is experiencing various degrees of globalization, incursions from gold miners, merchants, you know, going up and down even in remote areas by even dugout canoe. And so people's lives are changing, and it would be sort of sad and waste if like this idea that, oh, Chimane don't have heart disease, and so what can we learn from that? But what if the Chimane actually start getting heart disease? And that's actually happening right now. Hypertension is, just in the last decade, hypertension has gone up. People's bad cholesterol has gone up. We've seen more cases of diabetes. And so I do suspect that heart disease might be looming around the corner. And for all we know, maybe the Chimane are at even greater risk. I mean, some of the highest rates of diabetes and heart disease in the world, for example, are in Australian Aboriginals, higher than the non-Aboriginals in Australia. So taking that into consideration, let alone just the fact that, you know, the chronic diseases of aging, they're global, right? Most of the cases in the world of dementia in the next 50 years are all going to be in the global South. And so we really need to think kind of globally in terms of kind of aging and the implications. Yeah, so thanks for your question about that. I want one non-academic. Yes, Abby.
Okay, I was gonna ask, like, after all of this research and all the work you put in, have you made any like changes with your life to see be like? That's a good question. Kind of fall in line with these.
Can't you just look at what I write, not look at what I do? Yeah. I mean, to some extent, it's funny because on one level, what I come to do is not obsess over the latest findings on, you know, butter versus margarine, 15-minute bouts of activity versus 30-minute bouts of activity, and stress is sort of a powerful force that affects everything in our body, and I'd rather be stress-free eating French fries than stressed out eating carrots. So I kind of take a little bit of that lesson to heart. Certainly, I do have, this doesn't have to come from research, but maybe it's telling. One of the first uses of ChatGPT I used it for, wait, is this being filmed? Was to write my own obituary. Now, what was interesting, it was actually quite good. So I saved it in a file. I'll share it with anyone.
How did you die?
Well, it didn't say that. It didn't say that part. But that kind of framing my mind about like what would you want in your obituary, and in your final years, what would you look back on and say, I wish I did more of this or less of that, and almost invariably, right, it's more time with your social community, right? It's more time with family, more time with friends, neighbors. No one ever wishes they just had written one more paper or made just a couple $1,000s more money, slightly bigger television, all that kind of stuff. And so, taking that to heart, that's why I'm thrilled that all of you are here today, instead of, I was trying to think of a series that everyone's binging right now, but can't think of one. But yeah, so I think those things I take into heart. And I do one additional lesson. The one commonality to all small-scale, subsistence-oriented societies is physical activity. But the good news about that, it's not that hunter-gatherers are running the equivalent of a marathon every couple days, and so therefore it's hopeless for all of us. We're not running marathons. It's just that they do a lot of light and moderate activity, right? And so the Chimane, we put little accelerometers on people, and the average is about 17,000 steps a day, which is more than a lot of us are getting. But relatively small proportion of that is from vigorous activity. It's just a lot of light and moderate activity. So all the little choices about moving, in fact, I feel a little guilty because right before I was like, Lisa, should we walk here? She talked me out of it. It's dark. Yeah, but then if you get chased around, you have to run, so you get your vigorous activity. But yeah, so every little thing to add some activity, but it doesn't have to be something like vigorous and hardcore in order to count. And even the latest studies kind of mirror this, that everything counts and it's never too late for gaining some of those benefits. So yeah, quick. Michael. Oh, sorry. And then, sorry, Amber.
We'll take one more question. I was just going to
yeah.
say.
Amber,
Go ahead.
Just want to know when the audiobook is coming out, and will you be narrating?
So my dream has always been that Patrick Stewart would do it, or Larry David. And so far, actually, I don't know. Maybe I'm. This is my first book, so I'm new to book publishing, and I kind of annoyed Princeton. Like, where's the audiobook? I have friends that, it's a heavy book. They don't read books. They just listen to them. And they're like, yeah, that's a separate thing, blah, blah, blah. And, the bid is out. So as far as I know, there's no audiobook yet.
Until it makes the New York Times bestseller list?
Well, maybe that's it. Maybe it has, I don't know. But you all should kind of write Princeton and say, where's the audiobook? We want the audiobook.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll happen. And hopefully...
We can crowdsource it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, Larry David.
Yes.
I'd even go with Terry Gross. So yeah. Thank you.
So Michael, His book is 7 Decades, How We Evolved to Live Longer. Your talk was more than pretty good. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.